Ted Bundy is one of the most infamous serial killers in history, responsible for the deaths of dozens of women in the 1970s. His case has been the subject of much fascination and study, not only because of the sheer number of victims, but also because of the complexity of his behavior and the way he managed to evade capture for so long. In this script, we'll explore Bundy's childhood, his methods of killing, the controversy surrounding the number of victims he had, and the events that led to his eventual capture. Childhood life. Ted Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His birth name was Theodore Robert Cowell, but he later changed it to Bundy after his mother's second husband adopted him. Bundy's childhood was marked by a number of unusual and troubling events. His mother, Louise, was unmarried and often struggled to support herself and her son. She reportedly had a number of lovers and frequently moved around, which meant that Bundy grew up without a stable home environment. Bundy was a bright child and did well in school, but he was also described as shy and socially awkward. He had few friends and often felt like an outsider. As he entered adolescence, Bundy became increasingly interested in sex and began to exhibit deviant behavior. He would spy on his female classmates, steal their underwear, and engage in other forms of sexual harassment. It's not entirely clear what caused Bundy's deviant behavior. Some experts have suggested that he may have been the product of incest, as his mother and grandfather reportedly had a sexual relationship. Others have pointed to his unstable childhood and the lack of a positive male role model. Whatever the cause, it's clear that Bundy's early years played a significant role in shaping his later behavior. Ted Bundy's killing spree began in the 1970s, and his exact motivations for starting to kill are still unknown. However, it is widely believed that his first documented murder was committed in 1974, when he was 27 years old. Bundy's modus operandi was to approach women in public places, such as college campuses or shopping centers, and engage them in conversation. He would often use a fake injury or disability to gain their sympathy and lure them into his car. Once they were inside, he would overpower and assault them, often bludgeoning them with a blunt object or strangling them with his bare hands. Bundy's victims were predominantly young women, many of whom bore a striking resemblance to each other in terms of physical appearance. He would often revisit the locations where he had committed his crimes, and some of his victims' remains were found in remote wooded areas or shallow graves.
Although there are some indications that he may have committed earlier crimes that were never reported or connected to him. Bundy's first documented murder was of a young woman named Karen Sparks, whom he abducted from a crowded parking lot at the University of Washington in Seattle. After this first murder, Bundy's killing spree continued to escalate. He would often travel long distances to commit his crimes, which made it difficult for investigators to link the murders together. He was known for his ability to charm and manipulate people, which allowed him to avoid suspicion and continue to evade the authorities.
Ted Bundy was convicted of murdering at least 30 young women and girls, although the exact number of his victims is unknown and may be higher. Bundy himself admitted to killing over 30 victims, although some estimates place the number closer to 40 or even 50. Bundy's killing spree spanned several years and several states, including Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. He targeted young women who resembled his idealized vision of femininity, and he would often lure them into his car under false pretenses before assaulting and killing them. Bundy's modus operandi varied somewhat from victim to victim, but he typically used blunt force trauma, strangulation, or both to kill his victims. He would often dispose of their bodies in remote locations, such as wooded areas or shallow graves, which made it difficult for investigators to link the murders together.
Despite Bundy's numerous admissions and convictions, it is possible that he may have committed other murders that were never linked to him. Some law enforcement officials believe that Bundy may have been responsible for a number of unsolved homicides across the United States, although this has never been definitively proven. Ted Bundy's killing spree lasted for several years, beginning in the mid-1970s and ending with his capture and eventual execution in 1989. During this time, he committed a series of gruesome and heinous crimes that shocked the nation. Bundy's victims ranged in age from teenagers to young women in their mid-20s. He targeted women who were typically attractive, slender, and had long hair, often approaching them in public places such as college campuses or shopping centers. He would sometimes use a fake injury or disability as a ruse to gain their trust before attacking them.
Despite Bundy's many crimes, he was able to evade law enforcement for years thanks to his charm, intelligence, and ability to blend in with society. He was also known for his adeptness at escaping from custody, having successfully escaped from jail twice before being recaptured. Bundy's eventual capture and conviction was a result of tireless police work and the cooperation of multiple law enforcement agencies across the country. His trial was highly publicized and received extensive media coverage, with Bundy attracting a cult following of women who were drawn to his charisma and good looks. Bundy's legacy continues to be studied and analyzed by criminologists and psychologists to this day, as his case remains one of the most high-profile and disturbing examples of serial killing in American history.
He was finally caught in 1978, after a series of near escapes and narrow misses. Here's a detailed account of how Ted Bundy was caught. The arrest in Utah. On August 16, 1975, Bundy was pulled over by Utah Highway Patrol Officer Bob Haywood, who noticed that his car matched the description of a vehicle that was reported to be involved in a kidnapping attempt earlier that day. Bundy was arrested for driving a stolen vehicle and was later identified as a suspect in several murders in the area. The escape from Colorado. In 1977, Bundy escaped from custody in Colorado while he was awaiting trial for murder. He jumped out of a second-story window of the courthouse and fled to the mountains, where he eluded authorities for several days before being recaptured. The trial in Florida. In 1978, Bundy was put on trial in Florida for the murders of 2 young women. During the trial, he acted as his own attorney and tried to manipulate the court proceedings to his advantage. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was found guilty and sentenced to death. The second escape. Bundy escaped from custody again in December 1978, this time from a jail in Colorado where he was awaiting trial for another murder. He escaped by sawing a hole in the ceiling of his cell and crawling through the opening. He then walked out of the jail, disguised himself, and fled to Florida. The final capture. In Florida, Bundy continued his killing spree, but he was finally caught when a routine traffic stop led to his arrest. On January 15, 1978, he was pulled over by a Pensacola police officer, David Lee, who noticed that his car had stolen license plates. When Lee searched the car, he found burglary tools, handcuffs, and other incriminating items. Bundy was arrested and later charged with the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, which ultimately led to his execution in 1989. In summary, Bundy was caught through a combination of luck, careful police work, and his own mistakes. Despite his best efforts to evade capture, he was ultimately brought to justice and held accountable for his horrific crimes. Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair on January 24, 1989, in Florida State Prison. He had been sentenced to death for the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. Bundy had exhausted all of his appeals and had been on death row for nearly a decade. His execution was highly publicized and controversial, with some advocates arguing against the use of the death penalty, while others believed that Bundy deserved to be put to death for his heinous crimes. Bundy's execution marked the end of one of the most notorious and gruesome crime sprees in American history.